What a great reading. What a great reading today about listening to hear. What a concept, right? How many times have we been listening with the preparation of our rebuttal going on the whole time? Preparation of our answer, our argument, our justification, our defense, whatever the case may be, but instead of listening to hear. So I love that reading for many reasons. And that is a big piece of it right there, listening to hear and also not to make the other person wrong. We're in a place right now in our country, I don't have to tell you that we're in this place that the division continues to mount. And so we are the peacemakers, the change agents. It's up to us to be the change that we want to see and to be that peace that we are craving in the world, as we always talk about. And this is one way we can do that. As hard as it can be sometimes to not judge and sentence someone in our brain to exile from our lives based on comments they've made or the decisions that they make and the way that they live their life, it's really, really, I think, more beneficial for the overall picture and for our own individual lives if we can breathe into the space and listen. We might actually learn something. But more often than not, when we're able to do that, we give somebody else the space to learn something. So either way, leaning in and listening to hear is definitely a great jumping off point for what I want to address today, and that is building a culture of peace. Building a culture of peace. I got that from the whole concept of Global Peace Day, which is tomorrow. September 21st is Global Peace Day. It was established in 1981 by the United Nations, a unanimous vote. And it's a day for all humanity to commit to peace above differences and contribute to building a culture of peace. And as I was thinking about what does it take to have a culture of peace, that listening component was way up there at the top. How important, how vital it is that we learn to listen and not just shut down and close off to the world. But there's another component of listening that I think is equally important, and that is listening to ourselves. So often we don't listen to ourselves. So when you're getting into this merry-go-round of thinking, you're getting into this habit of something showing up that you really don't want to experience in your life, but keep showing up, and you realize, wait, I'm the common denominator. A good question to ask yourself is, as you're starting to listen to yourself, ask yourself, is this a helpful story that I'm telling, like the reading that we just had? Is this a helpful story that I'm telling myself right now? And if not, change the story. You know, those stories can look a lot of different ways, but is it a helpful story that I'm saying that all of these people that vote a certain way are stupid? Is it a helpful story that I say, well, Uncle so-and-so is always going to be that way, he's never going to change? Is it a helpful story to say, oh, it's, Tuesday, and so-and-so usually calls me on Tuesday to complain about blah, blah, blah? Is it a helpful story to say that I can't trust this person or I can't trust myself? Is it a helpful story? The stories that we tell that we realize are there and going on all the time behind the scenes when we stop and actually listen to ourselves. So listening both to others and to ourselves, I believe, is one of the key components to building a culture of peace. So I started looking around. I was just curious, what's out there about a culture of peace? And this interview came up, this video of kids talking about what was important to building a culture of peace. I thought, how perfect. So from an interview with children, here are some of the things that they said were important for building a culture of peace. One is, well, everybody's needs need to be met. Everyone needs to get what they need. I can go for that, absolutely. And it takes me back to, our prosperity classes when we talk about prosperity. And one of the first things that always comes up when we talk about prosperity is someone feels guilty that they're wanting more when they already have more than someone else has. And so the conversation usually comes up when we talk about prosperity of, yeah, but what about all the people that don't have? And the answer to that is we don't have a poverty problem in the world. We have a distribution problem in the world. So it's a good thing for people with loving consciousness and a desire to help and a desire to be a change agent in the world. It's a good thing to allow yourself to prosper and to do well. So that's just one of the things that comes up when thinking about having needs met, is to allow yourself to have your needs met, but to not just survive, but to thrive. So another kid said, well, everybody being included. Isn't it interesting that even when we were tiny little kids, we were having the issue of being left out and excluded. And here we are running around as adults, and there's definitely still some issues of inclusion, some issues where there's not inclusion, rather. And so inclusivity being very important, and focusing on our common ground instead of focusing on our differences and therefore separation. I'll throw justice in there too, inclusion and justice. So another kid said honesty. Honesty has to be there if we're going to have a peaceful culture. Out of the mouth of babes, right? So honesty. And another one said safety. We have to feel safe to be who we are. Absolutely. For us to build a peace culture, we have to have a culture of safety, a culture that promotes authenticity and vulnerability and being open. Another kid said releasing, well, I called it releasing control, but basically he said letting people be how they want to be. So letting others have their own ideas and their own opinions and their own way of being. That can be a tall order sometimes when we think we know the best way that for them to be and do and have and act and all that. But letting other people have their own ideas, their own opinions, their own way of being, releasing control. Being able to live together in the hard conversations. I'm going to add that in there as a component, an important component for building a peace culture, is being able to have the difficult conversations instead of just writing someone off. Being able to have the difficult conversations, that's where love and joy and possibility live. Being able to have the difficult conversations where you really are pretty sure you're right and the other person needs to get on board. Or maybe it's just uncomfortable because it's vulnerable. But in any case, having those conversations that are uncomfortable, that are hard, that's an important component to building a peace culture. I can't help but remember that as I was typing and writing and thinking and meditating on this talk, something that kept coming up while I was on my computer were notifications of someone from Facebook who vehemently disagreed with the idea that there was systemic racism in our country. And so I loved what Kate shared earlier this week, and I copied it. Thanks, Kate. I copied and pasted it, and it just said, "Don't understand all this Black Lives Matter stuff, ? Well, basically 400 years ago, white people had slaves that were black. And I mean, it wasn't condescending like I'm actually sounding right now. It was actually very well thought and went through, 400 years ago, then 200 years ago, then, all of the things that have happened, and it broke it down. And I wasn't trying, I checked myself, I checked in, I was like, okay, am I doing this to be condescending? No. Am I doing this to be informative? Yes. Okay, I'll post it. And then I put on there, it would just really be a great place to start to read this and then see how your life, for example, might have been different if you had been born black. And maybe we could have a conversation around it. Now, a few months ago, I was getting a little burnout on the conversation, and I was ready to just go delete, unfriend, unfollow at least, but let's go ahead and unfriend anyone that just wanted to have a different conversation, until I started taking more and more diversity and inclusion trainings and realizing that it's the conversations that make the change. It's the continuing to, I'm not saying I'm not going to unfriend people when they're being nasty, because I will do that. But continuing to just separate is just causing more of a divide. And so my hope and my continued effort is in the arena of leaning in, having an uncomfortable conversation, sometimes a frustrating conversation, and asking questions instead of telling people why they should think differently. I've started asking questions like, so what part of this post do you disagree with? They rarely come back with an answer. But the ones that do start a conversation that perhaps can lead to growth and coming together. I ask questions now instead of just telling people where they're wrong. And I believe that that is an important place for us to begin this coming together, this bringing the divide, the gap, or bridging it, as Eddie Watkins Jr. talked about a few months ago. Being the bridge is where the conversation helps us, is in being that bridge, those hard conversations. I haven't had any huge movement or cataclysmic shifts from any of my Facebook friends, and actually I've had some people that are now former Facebook friends because we just, one side or the other, decided, nope, this isn't working for my peace and harmony. But I still highly recommend, have the conversation. So what part of this do you disagree with? What part of this, whether it's about racism, whether it's about politics, but being able to have a conversation instead of just saying, those people are stupid, they watch that channel, they're stupid, they watch that channel, they're stupid. And instead realize that, you know what? There's a way to come together. And that's what's needed. Let's be that. Let's find that. And so that takes us to another important component, which is forgiveness. I talked about that last week. Dr. Ernest Holmes said to forgive everything, begin immediately, to forgive everyone, everything. Talked about it recently anyway. And so forgiveness is such an important part, but I don't know that I mentioned, and if I did, I'll reiterate it, the importance of forgiving ourselves. So forgive everyone, everything is also, we have to remember to include ourselves in that. Forgive ourselves of where we've fallen short. Forgive ourselves for where we meant to be able to lean in and have a loving conversation, but instead we smack somebody down. Or forgive ourselves for the times when maybe we didn't speak up, right? When someone else was not being heard and we could have been a voice for change. So forgiving ourselves, however that looks. Forgiving yourself because, you had a bad day and you ate a pint of chocolate ice cream, whatever. Forgiving yourself because it's in those places of shame and guilt that we block our connection to source, our connection to each other, our connection to the divine flow of life that leads and guides and directs our path, that intuition that tells us, yes, turn here, yes, take this job, yes, say yes to that date, yes, say yes to that conversation. So the shame and the guilt have to go, the unworthiness has to go, and if we're having any place in our heart and our lives where we are holding ourselves out of our heart, that has to be addressed. So releasing that shame and that guilt. Forgiving ourselves is where we add in the self-care, the self-love, and we create an inner atmosphere of peace. We can't impose it on the outer if we're not creating it and expressing it from the inner. So another important piece, another important component comes to us from an article that I read a few years ago about a vision for peace, a vision for creating a culture of peace in Pakistan. And there was a quote in there that said, what if a child being admitted in kindergarten can learn another way of fighting? From the first day of school, he experiences an atmosphere in which differences are appreciated and accepted. What if we taught our kids that differences are appreciated and accepted? And it goes on to say, and where peaceful conflict resolutions are the norm. Yes, teaching our kids that peaceful conflict resolution is the norm. By the time that student reaches the 5th grade, they will be selected as a mediator by their peers to settle disputes in class. Eventually, this young person will have the courage to be a hero for justice and peace for the rest of their life, whether they're a leader or a layperson. But they will have that empowerment. So 2 things jumped out at me from that are important components for building a culture of peace. And that is, as Dr. Ernest Holmes would say, living in expectancy of good, but then seeking it out and being powered to find it, to be it. Seeking it as the knowing that you are part of whatever that resolution is. So having an expectancy of good, expecting there to be an answer to whatever the difficult conversation or the difficult turn in life or twist in life is, and then expecting and being empowered to know that you are part of that solution. Positive conflict resolution. So important to know. I mean, we're always going to have conflicts, right? We're always going to have people that disagree. But what if we stopped writing the other person off, the other party off, the other family member off? What if we stopped writing people off and just had that, that space to breathe, to recognize that conflict happens, but peaceful resolution is possible. It does take a few things, though. It takes a few things to be in that space of positive resolution, and that is courage, compassion, and creativity. Courage, compassion, and creativity. Courage is just speaking your heart, speaking, being willing to live from your heart, to speak from your heart, and the compassion, being able to feel with somebody else, being able to feel what someone else feels instead of saying what they feel is stupid or wrong, being able to feel with another. And then the creativity, believing there's a win-win, believing and looking for, being empowered to be that win-win. So we turn to the children again for another moment of inspiration on these components for building a culture of peace. When I think about the Coleman Elementary School in Baltimore, Maryland, the Coleman Elementary School in Baltimore, Maryland was having quite a lot of disturbances. Kids were getting suspended right and left. And then they decided to implement something called the Mindful Moment Program. And so when a kid would become unruly or a disruptive element, instead of being sent to detention, they were sent to meditate, to do mindful breathing exercises, or maybe yoga, some type of mindfulness exercise instead of detention. And from the minute they implemented that program, no kids were suspended. Right? So when we're having these ideas of, how can we build a culture of peace? Well, it's when we get away from a culture of war. And what is a culture of war? It's when we live by force instead of by the innate power moving through us. We are one with the one that created us. There's a power moving through us for good that we can allow to flow freely when we remember to be in that space of mindful awareness, when we remember to breathe and to be fully present and to be realigned and recalibrated, tuned in, right? Tapped in, tuned in, turned on, as Abraham Hicks would say. Being in that flow. Yes, let's teach that to our kids, but let's also remember to teach it to ourselves, or to remember daily ourselves to have mindful moment programs of our own when we're feeling unruly, frustrated, overwhelmed. That's all that is your flag pointing you in the direction of, hey, like when you're running a race and you have the flags pointing you in the direction of the rest station. Well, that's just a flag pointing you in the direction of a rest station, of a recalibration station, a place to get back in tune with the power moving through you and out of the idea that I have to force this person to be this way. I have to force this solution. I have to force this. No, just be it. Just be it. Living from. We talk about that a lot in this teaching of Science of Mind philosophy. That if we want to demonstrate something, manifest, demonstrate, whichever you want to say, if we want to have something come into being in our experience, then we must be living from it, actually. That's how we bring it to us, is living from it in advance. That's why in January, I ask everyone to take a piece of paper and an envelope. And I said, write yourself a letter and let it start with, I am so happy and grateful now that. And put yourself 6 to 8 months into the future and pretend it's late summer and you're telling somebody about all the things you're grateful for that have transpired since January. So the letter started with, I am so happy and grateful now that. And you cover the 5 areas of life. In case you didn't do it, you can do it now. Mail it to yourself for Christmas present. Or for, later than that, however much time you want to give yourself. But we covered the 5 areas of life, primary areas of life: health and wealth, which could be, also your career, your passion, your drive. If you're retired, you still have something that drives you. Your relationships and your connection to the divine. So looking at all these different primary areas of life and saying, I am so happy and grateful now that, living from the energy as if it were already so. That's what we do in affirmative prayer. So we mailed out these letters and people started getting them. They started flooding in, and it's been so awesome to listen to the stories. For some people, it was like a slam dunk, right? I know you probably saw Melissa Summerlin's post on Facebook. She went through everything on her list, and it was like boom, 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 boom. Pain-free, walking and feeling great, just on and on and on, all these different things that came to fruition. And other people had some of the things on there and some of the other things they had completely forgotten about, and that's okay, because it brought their awareness right back to it. And so if nothing on your list has happened yet, that's just your opportunity. That's another flag, another soul flag for you to go realize, I got to a recalibration station. So I can go over here and step back into my mindful intention that this was important to me. Or maybe it's changed. Maybe you have a different idea of what's important now. But the whole concept, though, is to come from it. So to be in that space of I'm so happy and grateful now that. So I'm so happy and grateful now that I'm pretending right now. Let's pretend that it's December. I'm so happy and grateful now that we are living in an environment in our country that is peaceful and harmonious. I'm so happy and grateful to know that COVID is behind us, that we are living a life that is happy and healthy and harmonious. I'm so happy and grateful now that there are no forest fires moving across our country. I'm so happy and grateful now that the people who are affected by those have been able to recoup and rebuild. And you see, moving into that, whatever it is that is happening right now that is not what you'd like to see, can you take a moment and move into a place of living from the wish fulfilled, as Dr. Wayne Dyer used to say, live from the wish fulfilled. Step into it already. Be it. Live from it. I know many of you have heard me tell the story, one of my favorite Greg Braden stories that he tells in the book, The Modes of Prayer. It's a little red book. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. But he talks about going with his Native American friend to pray for rain, and they hike and they hike and they hike, and they get up this mountain out in the desert, and they've hiked for a while, and they get to this sacred site, and his friend steps inside the circle, these stones of his ancestors, his place, the sacred place for his people, and he steps inside, and he stands there for a moment. And I can't remember if he says some words or sings, but he's only there for just a couple of moments, and then he turns to Greg Braden and he says, "Okay, we can go." And Greg's like, "Wait, what? I thought you said we came here to pray for rain." And he says, "Oh, no, my friend. If we prayed for rain, rain would never come. I came here to pray rain, to feel the energy of my ancestors, to feel the earth beneath my feet, and feel what it feels like when the rain comes down, a steady, solid rain, and quenches the earth. I came here to feel it, to be it, to pray rain. Not to pray for it, but to live from it." That's so important that we live from it. So, speaking of our brothers and sisters on the West Coast, I wanted to read to you something today that was shared from our dear friend, Reverend Dr. David Alt, who shared with us recently in service. And he wrote this: "As fires burn, do not dismiss the power of your deeds as insignificant. Calm any flames of separatism with sacred kindness. As fires burn, do not dismiss the power of your words as insignificant. Provide refuge for worth, value, and safety. As fires burn, do not dismiss the power of your thoughts as insignificant. See in your mind all harm contained, all solution freed. It is done. Ashe, amen, blessed be, and so it is." So let's take a moment right now. Let's just pause for a moment. And let's be with, in our consciousness, in our heart, our brothers and sisters, the animals, the earth of our beautiful West Coast of these United States. And let's be in a space, in just a moment of silence, Let's hold in our hearts and in our consciousness, let's affirm and know the stillness of the air, the beautiful, quenching rain, the absence of fire, the clear air. Let's know for each and every person affected by the fires, let's know peace and calm. Let's know prosperity, safety. And let's just be in a moment of silence, sending our love and our intention that everyone is held in the hands of grace and all is well. To demonstrate anything, we must live from it. To demonstrate this peace culture, a culture of peace, we have to have a culture of peace in our own lives. To release anything within us that's unlike peace, we have to have that culture of peace within. We have to live from it. So let us live from peace, pray peace, be peace, and we will build a culture of peace. Imagine, feel it, know it is so, and so it is.